She fell for a handsome monk. He turned out to be a billionaire heir. She never expected her heart to be captured by a man of silence and serenity. But when the monk she adored reveals a secret world of wealth and power, everything she thought she knew is turned upside down. Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful story family. Before we begin, I would be glad to know that these lessons get to people in different parts of the world, so please let me know where you're watching from. And thank you so much for being part of this growing story family. You matter here, truly. Let us begin. Rain slammed hard against the windshield of Ariella Allison's rental car as she squinted through the downpour, trying to make out the winding path ahead. The GPS had lost signal miles ago. Her phone was dead. Her camera bag sat damp and useless in the back seat, water creeping in through a cracked window she couldn't roll up. She hadn't eaten since sunrise. She hadn't slept properly in 2 days. This was supposed to be the trip that turned everything around. A documentary on lost wisdom, ancient teachings, quiet rituals, forgotten voices. That was the pitch. That's what got the funding. Her goal was to explore the silence behind stone walls and find something real, something peaceful. Instead, she found herself stranded on a forgotten road in northern New Hampshire, headlights flickering, heart pounding, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her career. A jagged sign appeared through the sheets of rain, St. Wynn's Monastery. She nearly missed it. Slamming the brakes, the tires slid on gravel, stopping just shy of a carved wooden gate nestled into a tall stone wall. It looked abandoned, the kind of place you see in a photograph and feel like it hasn't changed in hundreds of years. She stepped out. Cold wind slapped her face. The storm had turned wild, branches bending, thunder close enough to shake her ribs. Her boots sank into the mud as she stumbled toward the gate, her fingers numb and stiff as she pounded on the ancient wood. No answer. She pounded again. Another flash of lightning lit the sky, and for a brief moment she saw the faded symbol above the gate, a simple hand carved into the wood, palm facing outward. The last thing she remembered was the crunch of footsteps behind the gate. Then darkness. Warmth came first. Flickering candlelight danced against the walls of a small room made of stone and cedar. A fire crackled in a hearth nearby. The scent of something herbal drifted through the air. She was lying on a simple cot, wrapped in wool blankets that smelled of lavender and earth. "Water," she whispered. A mug was already waiting at her side. A man, maybe in his mid-30s, handed it to her. He was dressed in plain clothes, brown robe, corded belt, and an expression that was hard to read. His eyes were gentle but distant, like he was both there and somewhere else entirely. "You're safe," he said. "You collapsed outside the gate. We brought you in." "We?" she asked, throat raw. "My brothers and I," he nodded. "This is St. Wynn's. I'm Brother Thomas." She sat up slowly, groaning as sore muscles reminded her of the storm. "My equipment, my cameras. They were in the car. The car's fine, still outside the gate. The gear's wet, but we brought it in. It's drying by the fire." She looked at him. "You brought in my camera gear?" He gave a slight smile. "You were talking about it in your sleep." Ariella blinked. "I'm a filmmaker. Documentaries." "I assumed." She took another sip of water, trying to remember what exactly she'd said. "I came here to find peace," she murmured, mostly to herself. "Well," he said, standing, "you've found quiet. That's a start." He turned to leave. "Wait." Her voice cracked again. "Why are you helping me?" He looked back, his face unreadable. "You knocked. We opened the door." As he stepped out, the heavy door closed gently behind him, leaving her alone with the sound of firewood popping and rain tapping the windows. She was a storyteller on a journey to find peace. What she found instead was a monk with a secret, and a love that would change everything. Have you ever met someone who turned out to be completely different than who they claimed to be? Drop your story in the comments. I read everyone. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, Ariella Allison stared at the ceiling, shivering slightly despite the warmth. Something about Brother Thomas didn't sit right with her. He had the calm of a man with nothing to hide, but also the stillness of someone who knew how to keep things buried. She came for peace, but part of her, the part that made her a good documentarian, felt a pull deeper than curiosity. Who was Brother Thomas, really? And why did it feel like she was exactly where she was meant to be? Seattle didn't sleep, not in the way Ariella Allison needed it to. It buzzed and blinked, endless traffic, flickering lights from late-night diners, the glow of studio monitors that never shut off. Her small one-bedroom apartment sat 5 floors above a food truck alley, where the hiss of grills and drunken laughter didn't stop until almost dawn. Not that she minded. The noise gave her something to focus on besides the silence her mother left behind. Ariella worked on documentaries the way some people drank, compulsively, as if stopping might cause something inside her to unravel. She chased stories relentlessly, pitched to networks that barely returned her emails, shot on low budgets and tight deadlines, always squeezing every ounce of emotion from real people and real places. She had a talent for getting others to open up, but not once had she turned the camera inward, not even when her mother died. Cancer. Fast. Brutal. Her mother had been the one person who saw Ariella clearly, beyond the driven perfectionist with the bulletproof expression and overstuffed calendar. Even toward the end, pale and fading in a hospice bed, her mother's voice remained steady. "Don't just chase awards, Ari. Find stories that matter." That was the last real conversation they had. Ariella remembered nodding, unable to speak, thinking, "What matters more than you?" But grief doesn't run on reason. It crept into her editing sessions, into interviews where she suddenly found herself zoning out mid-question, into late-night rewatches of old clips, footage of her mother laughing in a sunlit kitchen, telling stories as if she were still alive. Her therapist called it complicated grief. Ariella called it unfinished business. By the time a production house greenlit her latest pitch, A Quiet Mind, How We Search for Peace in a Chaotic World, she had already scouted 10 different locations. Urban retreats in Los Angeles, meditation centers in the desert, floating monasteries in Japan. None of them felt right, too curated, too clean. She wanted real peace, not commercialized, not Instagrammable, something deeper, something that couldn't be explained in a soundbite. She remembered reading about St. Wynn's Monastery in a forgotten online forum. A passing mention, really. Someone said the monks there lived like they were frozen in another time. No electricity, no phones, no press access. A few lines down, someone else had added, "They don't allow visitors, not unless they knock." That was enough to hook her. She dug deeper. There were almost no photos of the place, no contact numbers, just a mailing address, rural New Hampshire. It felt like a dead end. But something about the mystery tugged at her. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a hunger. Her friends didn't understand. "You could shoot anywhere," they said. "Why go off the grid when you already have a solid pitch?" They didn't know what it was like to wake up in a panic at 2 a.m., convinced you're wasting your life. To cancel plans so you could sit alone on your bathroom floor, editing a film about happiness while your chest felt like it was being crushed. To feel like you had to earn peace, as if calm was something only certain people deserved. Ariella had always been afraid of losing control, of being left behind. As a kid, she'd organized her books by spine color, sorted her clothes by fabric type. As a filmmaker, she storyboarded every frame, double-backed every hard drive, took pride in knowing every outcome before the first day of shooting. Control was her safety net. which is why the idea of this monastery, unreachable, unfiltered, untouched, felt both terrifying and necessary. She needed to let go. She just didn't know how. Before she left Seattle, she sat on her mother's porch for the first time in months. The house had been empty since the funeral. Dust hung in the air like memory. In the corner of the living room sat an old camcorder her mother used to play with, back when Ariella was a teenager, recording short films with zero plot and lots of heart. She played one of the tapes. Her mother's voice rang out from the screen, laughing as a younger Ariella directed a backyard scene with friends dressed in bathrobes. "This one's going to win an Oscar," her mother joked. Ariella smiled, not because it was true, but because, in that moment, she remembered why she started telling stories in the first place. It wasn't about awards. It wasn't even about peace. It was about truth. That's what led her down a muddy New Hampshire road during the worst storm of the year. That's what made her knock on a gate, soaked and shaking, chasing something no lens had captured before. She wasn't just making a film anymore. She was trying to heal. But what she didn't expect, what no storyboard or research ever prepared her for, was that someone else inside that monastery was searching too. Someone who knew exactly what it felt like to hide behind silence, and someone who had a reason to keep her from uncovering the truth. The warmth hit her first. Not sunlight, there wasn't much of that, but firelight, flickering orange against rough stone walls. Her head rested on something soft, goose feathers maybe. The scent of cedar and wool surrounded her. Someone had changed her into dry clothes. A wool blanket lay heavy on her body, pinning her to the narrow bed. Ariella blinked slowly. Her mind resisted the pull of waking. Every muscle throbbed. Her camera bag, ruined. Her phone, dead weight. Her hands ached. Her memory fogged. She remembered the gates, the knock, her knees giving out, someone pulling her in before the world tilted. Now this. A small room, one wooden chair. One window shuttered against the storm. No hum of electronics, no blinking lights. It felt like stepping into a century that wasn't hers. The door creaked open. A man stepped inside with a candle in one hand and a bowl of something steaming in the other. He moved slowly, without hesitation. Brown robe, sand-colored rope at the waist, bare feet despite the cold floor. He didn't speak at first, just set the bowl down on the chair and looked at her. "I'm Brother Leo," he said. His voice didn't match the room. Not old, not hollow, smooth. Mid-30s, maybe. American, but not quite. Polished. She blinked at him, trying to sit up, but her arms protested. "You collapsed at the gate. Dehydration. Exposure," he continued. "You've been asleep for 2 days." "Welcome to St. Wynn's," she cleared her throat. "You changed my clothes." He smiled faintly. "Sister Elira did. Don't worry. We're old-fashioned, not inappropriate." A pause. His tone was light, but his eyes were sharp. Gray-blue, watchful. She finally managed to sit. Her head swam. "My equipment?" "In the corner," he said, nodding toward the floor. "We dried what we could. I'm afraid some of it didn't survive the rain." She followed his gaze, her DSLR wrapped in cloth. Her backup mic cracked. Memory cards, hopefully salvageable. It didn't matter. "Not right now." "Thank you," she murmured. He pulled the chair closer and offered her the bowl. Lentil stew, simple, fragrant. She hadn't eaten since... She couldn't remember. For a while, they didn't speak. When she finished, he reached out and took the bowl without comment. She watched him as he moved back toward the door, something in the way he carried himself. Graceful, almost like he'd rehearsed his movements. He wasn't what she expected. No hunched back or soft belly. No quiet mumbling or ancient beard. This was a man who'd run at some point in his life, who'd argued in conference rooms and made hard decisions. "What did you do before this?" she asked. He turned slightly. "Before?" Before the monastery, you don't seem like someone who's always lived in silence. His smile returned, faint but real this time. You'd be surprised how silence finds us. And then he was gone, the door shutting behind him with a soft click. By the end of the week, she was walking again. Her body still ached, but the calm of the monastery had a strange effect. No clocks, no schedules, just bells in the distance, marking prayer, meals, reflection. The monks moved like water, quiet, consistent, always doing something useful. Ariella was given permission to film as long as she respected their rules. No interviews during sacred hours, no faces without consent, no questions about personal histories. She accepted. She needed this footage, even if the setting was harder to control than her usual projects. But every lens kept drifting back to him. Brother Leo. He wasn't supposed to be the subject. He was supposed to be background, just another robe in the candlelight. But the way he carried wood for the fire, how he spoke to the novices with quiet warmth, how he stared out the window like he was remembering something he wasn't allowed to say. It drew her in. One afternoon, she found him sitting beneath an old oak tree outside the chapel. A dog-eared book rested in his lap. She sat beside him without asking. "You quote Epictetus in your prayers," she said. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You know Stoics?" "I read," she replied. He nodded. "Not many pick up on that. Most think monks read only scripture." "I'm not most. I can tell." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It sat between them like something familiar. He flipped the book closed. She caught the title, Letters to Lucilius, Seneca. Worn pages, margins filled with notes, some in French, some in what looked like Russian. "You speak other languages?" she asked casually. "Some," he said, "enough to annotate Seneca in 3 dialects. A flicker of something crossed his face. Old habits die hard. "Were you a teacher?" A pause. "You ask a lot of questions." "I'm a documentarian. That's my job." He studied her face, then said quietly, "What's your real reason for coming here?" She looked at the camera hanging around her neck, then past it, at the monastery rising behind them, like a shadow of another life. "I lost my mother," she said. "She told me to find stories that mattered. I thought, maybe this was one of them." His voice softened. "And have you found peace?" She shook her head. "Not even close." He turned away, gaze fixed on the tree branches overhead. "I used to work with people who talked about peace," he said slowly. "They bought it like a product, scheduled it between board meetings. But when everything fell apart, none of them knew what to do." She looked at him. "What did you do?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up and said, almost too casually, "Dinner's in 20 minutes." As he walked away, she thought she heard him mutter, barely audible, "Tell the executive I'll call him back." She froze. Executive? There were no executives here. That night, she sat in her room staring at her footage, reviewing clips, cataloging voices. Leo appeared again and again, in frame, out of frame, speaking to others, walking alone. He was magnetic, unintentional. His presence pulled at the lens. Who was he? A monk, yes, but not only that. His Latin was fluent, his questions sharper than most professors. He wore the robe, but the robe didn't quite wear him. Ariella had been trained to sense when someone was performing. And Leo, kind as he was, had the air of someone who'd spent a long time hiding in plain sight. If you had to walk away from everything, fame, money, identity, what would you miss the most? Let me know in the comments. The days at St. Wynn's began to blend, not in monotony, but in rhythm, like breathing. Morning bells, cold air, communal breakfast in silence, a walk through the gardens, filming, editing what little her salvaged equipment allowed. But through it all, Leo was there, never seeking her out, but never far. They started to speak more, not interviews, not formal, just conversations, honest ones. The first was about grief. They were walking a path that wound through a copse of sycamores, leaves brittle underfoot, sunlight filtering through like softened gold. She was adjusting her lens, catching how the wind whispered through the branches, when he asked, out of nowhere, "Do you believe the dead stay with us?" She paused, not because the question shocked her, but because it didn't. "I want to," she said. "I talk to my mom sometimes, not out loud, just in here." She touched her chest lightly. She used to say, "Tell stories like they're lanterns, shine them into the dark." Leo nodded slowly. "She sounds like someone worth listening to." She was everything, and she died too young. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just full. Then Leo said quietly, "I used to live a life full of noise, constant input. My phone was glued to me. I scheduled sleep. I built something big, fast, loud." She turned to him. "What happened?" He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I realized I didn't know who I was without the sound." She waited for more. He didn't give it. But the look in his eyes said, "I lost myself, and maybe something more." That night she watched him from a distance during evening prayer. His head bowed, his fingers still. He looked nothing like the man she imagined from his description of his old life. But maybe that was the point. Maybe that life had to die for this one to begin. They grew closer in subtle ways. She would find fresh mint on her window ledge after mentioning she missed it in her tea. He would pause by her editing bench to ask about framing or color, just long enough to seem curious, not lingering enough to be noticed by the others. But someone was noticing. Sister Elira, gentle and clear-eyed, took Ariella aside one afternoon as she filmed the courtyard. "He's kind, I know," Elira said softly, "and we live in silence, not blindness." Ariella flushed. "We're just talking." Elira didn't smile. Attachment can be a gift. It can also be a tether. Then she walked away, robes whispering behind her. One evening, Ariella and Leo sat beneath the bell tower. The sky had turned the color of bruised plums, stars beginning to prick the darkness. They didn't speak at first. She was fiddling with the last good lens she had, trying to capture the silhouette of the monastery against the dusk. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. "After this place?" He hesitated. "I used to plan 5 years out," he said. "I had goal charts, performance metrics. Now I wake up and ask myself, can I keep choosing quiet? And can you?" "Some days, yes, some days. I miss coffee shops and thunderstorms in cities. I miss anonymous crowds," she smiled. "I miss Wi-Fi that works." They laughed, soft and surprised, like they'd both forgotten the sound of it. Their hands brushed as she passed him the camera. He froze, just for a second. But it was there. A spark. She pulled her hand back, almost startled. He didn't move. The sky deepened. Stars swelled brighter. A comet cut a quick arc in the distance. "You okay?" she asked gently. "I haven't touched another person in a long time," he said, not dramatic, just honest. Her chest ached, not with pity but recognition. "You don't have to be alone forever," she whispered. He turned toward her. His eyes reflected starlight. "No," he said, "but I have to know what I'm offering first." She nodded. "Fair." They didn't kiss, they didn't reach for each other, but they sat close enough to feel the shared warmth in the night air, neither of them moving, both pretending they didn't want to. The next day, Ariella felt the shift. She saw it in the way the other monks looked at her, polite but distant. A subtle coolness, like she was something dangerous. A fire too close to the monastery walls. She overheard whispers in Latin, too fast to catch, but the tone was unmistakable. Concern, caution. Leo noticed, too. He started pulling away, just slightly, taking longer routes, avoiding shared moments. Still kind, still himself, but muted. She confronted him beneath the apple trees, late afternoon sun slanting across his face. "You're avoiding me." "I'm protecting you," he said simply. "From what?" "From me." She crossed her arms. "That's not your decision to make." He sighed. "You don't understand what I left behind." "Then tell me." A beat. "I can't, not yet." "Then what are we doing?" He didn't answer. She turned away, heart pounding, angry, hurt, wanting to scream, but knowing she couldn't. Not here. Later that night, she found a note tucked into her editing notebook. A single sentence written in careful script. "Sometimes silence is the only way to keep something sacred." No signature, but she knew whose hand had written it. The storm returned 3 days after Leo's note, heavy, relentless. Rain hammered the slate roof of the monastery, soaking the cloisters, turning gravel paths to rivers. Ariella stayed mostly inside, pacing the stone corridors, chasing distraction. She was filming less now, editing more, pouring herself into hours of footage as if meaning might rise from pixels and shadows. But Leo filled her mind. He was everywhere, in half-captured glances, the way his voice carried across the chapel, in every silence that now felt full of things left unsaid. The monks, for the most part, left her alone. But Brother Emile, the monastery's librarian and unofficial historian, had taken a quiet interest in her project. He'd offered access to the monastery's archives, a cramped, musty room buried behind a creaking oak door, filled with weathered volumes, fading ledgers, and dusty photographs cataloging centuries of quiet lives. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but maybe that was the point. She thumbed through old documents, maps, ledgers of harvests, faded records of births and deaths. Nothing felt urgent or even useful, until she found the photograph. It was tucked in the back of a guest ledger from 5 years ago. A group photo, 4 monks and a man standing just slightly apart from the rest. Tall, dark blonde hair, trimmed close, clean-shaven. No robes, but it was the eyes. Eyes she knew. Ariella's breath caught. He was younger, but unmistakable. The same angular jaw, the same steady, unreadable gaze. Logan Powell. She didn't even register her own movement. The photo clutched in her hand, she burst from the archives, heart pounding, footsteps echoing down the hallways until she reached the outer garden. There he was. Leo, Logan, kneeling by the herb beds, hands deep in the earth, sleeves rolled. He looked up, startled by the force of her arrival. "You lied," she said. He stood slowly, mud still on his hands. "Ariella." She held up the photo, hand shaking. "This is you?" A pause, then he said it. "I didn't want to be found." Logan Powell disappeared 4 years ago. Headlines, search parties, investigations, and you were here the whole time. I didn't want to be him anymore. Her voice rose, sharp and raw. You let me think you were just some monk with a mysterious past, but you're not just anyone. You're him, the tech prodigy, the billionaire, the ghost. I never meant to... You never meant to what? Her voice cracked. Get close to me? Let me fall for a version of you that doesn't exist? He didn't flinch. That version exists. This version. I've been trying to find him for 4 years. She shook her head. You told me you lived a life full of noise. You didn't mention you created half the noise. He exhaled, slow and heavy. My father died, he said. I was supposed to take over Powell Industries, billions on the line, thousands of employees, board members who saw me as a brand, not a son. I wasn't grieving, I was being groomed. Every time I tried to step back, they pulled harder. So you ran? Yes. You just walked away from everything? "I didn't walk," he said quietly. "I disappeared. Gave up the name, the money, the world that told me who I was supposed to be. I needed to find out who I was without it." Ariella stared at him, thunder cracking overhead. "I told you about my mother," she said, "about how I don't let people in easily, and still, you chose to hide this." "I didn't know how to tell you," he said. "Not once I knew what you'd think." She stepped back. "I thought I knew you." "You do know me, better than anyone has in years. But I didn't know your name." Lightning streaked the sky. They stood in the rain. She didn't know if she was crying, or if it was just the storm. He reached for her, then stopped himself. "I was trying to protect what we had," he said. She whispered, "You destroyed it." They said nothing for a long while, just the sound of the rain, the garden dripping around them, the world too loud with things that couldn't be taken back. Later, alone in her room, Ariella stared at the photo again. It looked like a relic, like evidence of a person who no longer existed. Logan Powell had built an empire. Logan Powell had disappeared. Leo had knelt in the garden and asked her if the dead stayed with us. Was he mourning his old life or hiding from it? She opened her notebook to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, "Would you forgive someone for hiding who they truly were if they were doing it to find peace? Why or why not?" She let the question sit there, for the camera, for her audience, for herself. She didn't know the answer yet. That night, she didn't sleep. She went back through all her footage, every frame of Leo. Logan, his hands helping her with the camera. The way he watched the trees when he thought no one was looking. How he paused before answering anything that mattered. She saw the truth now, buried in plain sight. The restraint, the care, the grief. He had never lied outright, just withheld. Layer after layer of omission wrapped in silence. The footage was different now. So was she. Morning came, gray and wet. Leo knocked on her door before breakfast. She didn't answer, but he left something outside her door, a small wooden box. Inside, a flash drive, labeled simply, "Before." She hesitated before inserting it into her laptop. What filled the screen was startling. Footage of Logan, boardrooms, product launches, news clips, smiling with CEOs, speaking to stadiums, flashbulbs, applause, and then nothing, black. Then a selfie video, taken in a dark room, his face bare, eyes red. "I'm done," he said, "not with life, but with all of this." He looked into the camera, not pleading, not performing. "I want to know if there's more than noise." It ended there. No explanation, just the truth. By the next morning, Leo was gone. Not from the monastery, but from sight. Ariella heard that he'd asked the abbot for a period of deeper solitude. No contact, no talking, no involvement in community activities. A vow of silence longer than before. She said nothing, but every part of her ached. She'd come here chasing a story about peace. She'd found a man who was still looking for it, and maybe she was too. The monastery gates creaked open just after sunrise. Ariella didn't say goodbye. She didn't want to risk seeing him, not in that final unraveling moment. Her pack was light. Most of the weight she carried wasn't on her shoulders anyway. The car that met her at the edge of the village wasn't early or late, just there. Like everything outside monastery walls, on time, efficient, indifferent. As they pulled away, she looked back only once. The spires of the monastery pierced the fog like memory. Beautiful, untouchable. She told herself she was leaving for good. In the quiet cell he'd made his home for years, Logan sat cross-legged on the floor, hands still. He'd returned the robe to its hook and wore only a plain linen shirt. The kind she once teased made him look like a ghost in a painting. The silence he'd once cherished now pressed in on him like a vice. Before Ariella, it had felt like peace. After her, it felt like absence, a cruel mimicry of the stillness he'd worked so hard to find. Letting her go, he told himself, was the honorable choice. But if it was the right one, why did it feel like something vital had been carved out of him? Back in Seattle, Ariella's apartment welcomed her like a museum piece, untouched, familiar, and irrelevant. The skyline still glittered, her inbox overflowed, her calendar buzzed with meetings postponed weeks ago. She couldn't bring herself to answer a single call. Her editor texted, "Where's the footage? This could be the best thing you've ever made." She stared at the message, then powered off her phone. She hadn't even watched the last interviews. She couldn't. Not yet. The footage felt poisoned, or worse, tainted by something that used to feel like love. She poured herself coffee, watched it go cold, and poured it out. At night, Logan walked the cloisters until the moon was high. His vow of solitude had ended, but he stayed silent anyway. Words felt like betrayals now, like they could only unravel what little peace remained. He still tended the garden, still prayed at the chapel, still answered when the abbot called on him. But when no one was watching, he'd close his eyes and remember her voice, not her words, just the sound of her laughter in the courtyard. The way she whispered, "Wait," when they watched the stars, afraid to break whatever spell held the moment together. The monastery no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like penance. Ariella tried to work. She opened a new project folder. Blank. Then closed it. She walked to her favorite cafe and couldn't bring herself to sit. The crowd felt distant, the noise too sharp. She'd spent years chasing stories in the middle of chaos. Now, even the simplest sounds overwhelmed her. She sat on a park bench for nearly an hour before realizing she hadn't blinked in minutes. Everything moved around her. None of it reached her. Logan stopped journaling. The notebook where he'd once written daily reflections now gathered dust. What more was there to say? You ran. You hid. Then you found someone who saw you, and still, you let her leave. Ariella watched old videos of her mother. Her voice filled the small apartment like a ghost long overdue. "Find stories that matter," she used to say. Ariella had thought that meant war zones, protests, injustices no one wanted to name. But now she wasn't sure. Maybe the most important stories weren't the loud ones. Maybe they lived in the quiet spaces, in broken trust, in people trying to put themselves back together after the silence settled. Maybe that was the real story, and maybe it wasn't over yet. Logan found her scarf one morning, caught in the low branches of an olive tree near the garden wall, forgotten in the wind, pale blue, software. He held it for a long time. Then he closed his eyes and whispered, "Forgive me." Not to her, to the universe, to himself, to the version of him that thought peace could come without sacrifice. Ariella pulled the drive from her desk drawer, the one he had given her, labeled before. She hadn't touched it since. She plugged it in, watched it again, and cried. Not because of what he was, but because of who he was trying to become. Seattle had never looked smaller. Logan stood on the edge of Capitol Hill as the sun slid behind the skyline. A misty drizzle glazed the streets. His coat collar was turned up, but he made no effort to shield himself from the cold. After years cloistered in stone corridors and sunlit silence, the city roared like an old friend he'd once betrayed. He didn't call her, didn't announce his return. He simply walked into the theater as the lights dimmed and took a seat in the back row, heart pounding louder than the hush that fell over the crowd. On screen, her voice opened the film. "This isn't the story I set out to tell. It's not about monks or rituals or ancient wisdom. It's about silence and what we find when we finally stop running from ourselves." The footage followed slowly. Wide shots of the monastery's arches, close-ups of weathered hands folding prayer beads, wind through olive trees, and then him. Not named, not narrated, just a quiet presence, tending the garden, listening, laughing once. The camera loved him, but the voiceover didn't idolize him, it framed him. Some people disappear to hide, others disappear to become someone worth finding. She hadn't exposed him. She told the truth without betrayal. And somewhere in that edit room, between her heartbreak and her healing, she had given him back his humanity. When the credits rolled, the audience sat in silence for a breath longer than usual. Then came the applause. Logan didn't clap. He was already on his feet, moving toward the exit before the lights rose. But he didn't leave. He waited in the shadows of the lobby, beneath the glow of old movie posters, heart drumming against his ribs like it was trying to get out. She stepped out from backstage 20 minutes later, radiant in a simple black dress, flanked by friends and film crew, glowing from the inside out. He didn't move until her eyes found his. Her feet stopped mid-stride. Conversation dropped from her lips like it had never belonged there. For a second, neither spoke. Then, softly, like the crack of dawn through a dark room, she said, "You came." His throat tightened. "I didn't know if I had the right." "You didn't," she said, breath catching. "But you came anyway. I had to see what you did with the pieces I left behind." She stepped closer, people blurring around them like extras in a scene they weren't part of. "I didn't use your name," she said. "I know," he replied. "You told the truth without telling the world. You protected what mattered." She tilted her head. "Why are you here?" His voice was low, steady. "Because the monk died the day you left." A long pause. "I'm ready to live again." Ariella didn't rush. She studied him like someone cross-checking reality with memory. His eyes were the same, but not. He looked older, more rooted, like the soil had finally taken him in. They walked outside together. The rain had stopped. For a long while they said nothing. The night buzzed around them, neon and alive, but their silence wasn't empty. It was full of things they'd never said, things they finally could. She broke it first. "I wanted to hate you. I expected you to. I told myself I was done, that it was just another betrayal." He nodded. "I was afraid of being known, afraid that if you saw everything, you'd walk away." "I was afraid too," she said, "afraid of letting someone in, only to lose them." A small laugh escaped her lips, sad but soft. "I spent so long trying to control everything, to make sense of chaos by documenting it. But you weren't something I could frame. I didn't want to be a subject," he admitted, "but I never expected to become someone you'd care about." She turned to him. "You never stopped being Logan. You just didn't want to wear the name anymore. I didn't know who I was without it. And now?" He hesitated, then met her gaze. "Now I know who I want to be. With you, if there's still a chance." Her expression flickered. Pain, doubt, hope, all tangled into one. "This isn't a fairy tale," she said. "It's not clean." He stepped closer. "I'm not asking for clean. I'm asking for true." The space between them vanished, not with fireworks, but with gravity. She let out a breath. "Do you still have the scarf?" A small, stunned smile broke across his face. "It's in my pocket." That made her laugh for real. They walked, side by side. Quiet. Not because they had nothing to say, but because the words didn't need to hurry anymore. Somewhere between the theater and her apartment, she slipped her hand into his. He didn't flinch. He just held it, like it had always belonged there. By morning, the city stirred like a giant stretching its limbs. And somewhere in a tiny second-floor apartment, Logan made coffee while Ariella flipped through her old journals. "We could start something new," she said, not looking up. "Not a film. Something different. Something for us." He nodded. No grand declarations, no dramatic turns. Just two people, scarred, changed, choosing, not to forget, but to begin. Months passed, seasons shifted. The city of Seattle, sprawling and bright, hummed with the constant pulse of progress. But in a small, quiet corner of it, inside an old but warm office, Logan Powell made his way into a world he never imagined for himself. Powell Industries, once a symbol of wealth and control, now had a new face. Logan had reclaimed the family name, not with the intent to rebuild the empire as it once stood, but to redefine it, to reshape its legacy. He wasn't the same man who had left the mansion, the boardrooms, the sharp suits, and endless meetings. Gone were the days of high-powered decisions that were more about profits than people. Instead, he took up a new mantle, a new vision, sustainability, education, wellness. Logan found purpose in the work that was built not on stock prices, but on the foundation of something much more valuable: change, real change, the kind that didn't just move the needle for shareholders, but impacted communities, healing the earth and nurturing minds. And beside him, always beside him, was Ariella. She had become more than just a filmmaker. Her lens was no longer confined to the boundaries of documentary work. Together, they created a series of films that touched lives in ways she had never dreamed. She found stories everywhere. People who, like Logan, had walked away from everything, the trappings of power, status, and wealth, to discover something deeper, something that truly mattered. They didn't just leave behind titles and money. They found their real selves, their true purpose. And those stories, told through Ariella's camera, rippled out into the world, urging others to reconsider what success meant. But their story wasn't about them becoming heroes. It was about recognizing that success isn't always measured in grand gestures. It's in the small, meaningful moments, the quiet, intentional work, the steps we take every day to stay true to who we are. One evening, as Logan sat on their small balcony overlooking the soft glow of the city, Ariella stood beside him, her arm gently brushing against his. They had sold the large house they once lived in, choosing instead to live simply, yet purposefully. Their home was modest, a reflection of the lives they now led. Logan had let go of his past. The pressure of legacy, of expectations, no longer held him captive. Instead, he woke each day with a sense of calm he had never thought possible. Peace, he had discovered, wasn't something you could buy. It wasn't something you could force. It was earned through living a life of integrity and connection. Ariella looked out at the horizon, her eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes you have to disappear," she said softly, "to become who you're meant to be." Logan turned to her, his eyes full of quiet admiration. "And sometimes the world just needs to hear your story." She smiled, the same gentle smile she had given him all those months ago when they first met. Under the heavy weight of their respective pasts, she no longer felt the need to hide behind a lens, and she no longer felt like she had to control everything, every outcome. In this moment, she was simply herself. She pulled out her phone, tapping away at a few words, as Logan leaned back against the balcony. The city stretched out below them, the lights twinkling like tiny stars. For the first time in a long while, it felt like everything was in its place. They weren't chasing after anything anymore. They weren't living for anyone but themselves, and in doing so, they were living for the world. Logan glanced at Ariella as she worked. "What's the next story?" Ariella looked up from her phone, her eyes bright. "The next story is yours," she said, her voice filled with certainty. "It's about what happens when you leave behind everything you thought you were supposed to be and finally listen to who you are. It's about real success, not the kind the world tells you to chase, but the kind you create when you listen to your heart." Logan reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "And what do you call that kind of success?" She smiled. "Peace." They both fell quiet again, the sound of distant city life mingling with the soft evening breeze. Years later, their work continued to grow, but it wasn't about fame. It wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about building an empire of wealth. They didn't need the world to applaud them. They simply wanted to leave it better than they found it. Logan was no longer the heir to Powell Industries. He was a man who had found his own legacy, built from the ground up on honesty, humility, and purpose. Ariella was no longer a documentary filmmaker telling other people's stories. She was a partner in every sense of the word, telling the stories of those who had found the courage to walk away from everything for the sake of their own peace. Together, they had created a life that had meaning, that mattered. And in the quiet, intimate moments when they sat together and watched the world move forward, they knew that they had made the right choice. And as the rain started to fall again that evening, lightly at first, then heavier, Ariella leaned against Logan, her head resting on his shoulder. "Sometimes," she whispered, "you have to disappear to become who you're meant to be." The world was big, and life was full of stories, but this one, their story, was a quiet reminder that sometimes it's the simple things that mean the most. What's one thing you would give up to find peace? Let's talk about it below. And if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more soul-stirring American stories just like this.